An opinion court, we are asking you, what is the new frontier in our politics? What will shape the next 5 years? Is it the 2022 politics, constitutionalism, reforms, policy? Well, we went around the country asking this question and we'll be sampling your views shortly. But first, a look at cartoonist's view of politics today. Whilst we ponder the question of the new frontier in our politics, journalist Patrick Gavara opines that not much has changed in a half a century. He gives Opinion Court an exclusive first look at this cartoon for the Elephant blog, which will be up tomorrow. Be it the State Law Office under Charles Njonjo on the left or the current one under Githu Muigai, Gavara opines this is how Kenya is unwittingly repeating history, with public servants who are meant to serve the people instead using the law to serve partisan interests in the fight for who becomes ruler. Finally, this country is still divided and everyone is on one section of the political class, and we believe that we need a national dialogue. We'll be talking about that shortly, but let's start by taking a look at that cartoon with my guests. And I'll start with you, Macharia. What do you think?
A very accurate reflection of where we are today and where we were in 1975 or thereabouts. I remember writing about exactly the same thing last August when Attorney General Githu Muigai started warning that anybody who imagines being sworn in is committing treason and will be hanged. It doesn't make sense. And to me, that is not Githu Muigai speaking. The Githu Muigai I know is a very sharp, very reasonable, very learned, very intellectual person, a brilliant lawyer. That is not Githu Muigai. That is somebody who is just trying to please his political masters. That is somebody who is bringing that dictatorial mindset of Attorney General Charles Njonjo, or there's another buffoon called James Kamere. That kind of mindset we really do not need today. And I refuse to believe Githu Muigai can defend that law. But
it goes beyond just imagining become president. The scenario that we're talking about is the possibility that someone will be sworn in with the title of President of the Republic of Kenya, parallel to another swearing in that took place under the Constitution.
What I wrote then was that I am also preparing myself to be sworn in as President of Masharistan, or whatever you can call it.
Wow.
I can go to Uhuru Park and pay some pastor to swear me in. Should that shake anybody at State House?
No, because you don't have millions of followers.
So it is the number of followers that matter, or is it the principle of the law? The law has nothing to do about followers. It is the principle of the law. I can stand in Kenyatta Market or Freedom Corner or wherever and declare myself President of Kenya. So what? People will come, they'll look, they'll laugh, they'll go home, and life will continue. The moment you start arresting me because of that, it is not what brings attention to the kind of nonsense we are seeing sometimes. Look at this thing today. What was his name? Cabinet Secretary Matiang'i writes to some newspaper threatening to sue them because of an article which he imagines is writing about him. I had never read that article in my life, but I went to look for it.
So ignore the whole thing you're saying, and it will
go
away.
Who had actually read that article? And of those who had read, how many assumed that anybody who can be described as what was the description? A staunch Christian, a strong man, a cabinet secretary can only be Matiang'i.
Oh dear.
There are 13 other 18 other ministers who could go to the same description. The moment you come and say, you must be referring to me, oh, you call our attention to it.
Okay, fair game. But I want us to return to the subject matter. Daisy, one can infer that Gavara is saying, in response to the question whether there is a new frontier in politics, that frankly there isn't. It's the same politics of a half a century ago, at least.
I think what he paints is the tragic picture of where Kenya is at. And Kenya is stuck between the old and the possibility of the new. But what he's showing us is the kind of leadership that we have over us is really the same leadership that we've been trying to break away from, so that we have a contradiction between what we see in the Constitution and the new Constitution, which was promulgated, offering so much hope for a new Kenya, but we have a leadership that is stuck and cannot translate this country into what is envisioned in the new Constitution. And because they cannot do that, they use the same old, apparatus that they have, which is in their minds, because they can't do things differently. It is about using the state, weaponizing the state against the citizenry, threatening, issuing threats, and I agree with Macharia. The law is very clear, the Constitution is very clear about what constitutes swearing in a head of state. Now, the challenge here is this: you have a political leader who has a cult-like following. So what does that portend for the country? And it shows that we are stuck in a place where we need real leadership to actually begin to address the challenge of what is being presented by this swearing in and the people who support that avenue. Because there is disaffection in this country. There is one group that says accept and move on. We have a legally sworn in president, legally. There is another group that is saying we may be legally sworn in, but he lacks legitimacy. This is a president who was elected where 15 million people boycotted, the election. So here there's the question of legitimacy. But we need leadership to be able to address that issue, not threats, not strong arming people, not the kind of talk that we see that has actually polarized this country. So I think that we have the kind of leadership over us that unfortunately cannot envision a different Kenya as is envisioned within the law.
All right, let's take a look at that cartoon again and get your views, Patrick.
I think two clear things. One thing has changed between the earlier cartoon with Kamaria and the one with Githu Muigai. At that time, you would not be allowed to call anybody president. That was reserved for one person in the country at that time, by law, almost by decree. Right now, I'm a Rotarian, and the person who's in charge of my club is called a president. Right? So that has changed in terms of the fact that that time it was almost treasonable because you were not even allowed to use that word. But right now, I think that whole thing has changed, that using the word president for this and the other, it's quite open. The sad thing for me, and I think Daisy has touched it quite well, is that we've been through a very, very nasty process in the country in terms of getting a constitution. All the stuff we're seeing now happened before, and we armed and aired and had bombers draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, everything else, until eventually we got one document that was supposed to guide the country going forward. We haven't, and our leadership, since the promulgation of that constitution, has not moved us forward with that constitution. And that is why we are where we are now. Because if you go back to that constitution of 2010, all the stuff we're talking about now had been taken care of. But the people who have been chosen into those institutions that are contained in the constitution and our leadership in general are actually not living that constitution the way it's supposed to be. It's still about me and me and me, rather than the best for the people of Kenya. I am a servant of the people of Kenya, and I am doing things on behalf of those people in line with what the constitution told me to do.
Right.
And I think that cartoon is absolutely on spot on.
But Prof, our topic tonight is, the new frontier in politics. But before we get there, has politics shifted significantly from the days of the former Attorney General Charles Njonjo?
Not at all. In fact, and if you look at our country, in 1963 we were sick, and we hoped that we would deal with the sickness and become healthy people with a healthy nation. But in the mid-70s and most of the Moi administration, we actually moved from the sick bed to the high dependency unit. Now, where we are in 2018, we are in a critical condition, and we are actually in the intensive care unit. Some of the things that looked like they were going away in 1963 have turned from what looks like an ordinary wound to a cancerous ailment. So, in fact, as we do that, therefore, some of the things that we need to deal with, things like corruption, have graduated to new and very complicated levels, which require an urgent solution. In fact, on paper, in terms of legislation, we have gained quite a lot of things. But in terms of changing things that are on paper and which have even been mentioned by my brother with regard to constitutionalism, we have done it. But have we, on the ground, the mentality in 1963, 64 is the same mentality. In 64, 65, 66, you have a quarrel between the Odinga and the Kenyatas. Today, the quarrel is still between the Odingas and the Kenyatas, and they want to do the same things the same way. So, in terms of frontier, nothing really has changed. We are doing things the same way, and we are not going to change these things by just talking about them. Something needs to be done. 66, 74, now 2018. Have we changed? Now, in terms of, if you put it and say we don't want to discuss the Odinga and the Kenyatas, look at Parliament. When it comes to their own interests, they do things the same way. Today you are telling me we have political parties that have a difference. What's the difference? For example, is NASA going to reject the new parks that have been reintroduced? Yes, they have disowned the Serem Commission. Right. Then they tell us they are different. What is the difference? Jubilee and NASA are going to do the same with regards to taking away our money. We have been immobilized in terms of fighting corruption. We are unable to deal with ethnicity. We are unable to deal with the poverty, but we are excellent in stealing public resources. These are things that are happening. So the next frontier is going to be set by ourselves.
Let's hold that thought.
Yes, but
we'd love to hear what you think that
but for now, what happened in 1963, 70 is still the same story, and we are tired of this old story.
Well, as we mentioned to you from the start of the show, we went across the country asking you what is the new frontier. It's a new year, 2018. What should be the new frontier in our politics, and what do you imagine will govern the next 5 years? This is what you had to say.
Purely succession politics. Unfortunately for this country is that we may spend the next 5 years in politics instead of development.
The first one is the electoral injustices. The second one is succession politics, and the third one is corruption, fighting corruption.
President Kenyatta and Prime Minister Raila Odinga to come and sit together for the sake of unity of Kenyans.
Tunataka uchumi ushughulikiwe kwanza na watu tusifutane. Hawa wakubwa wanafutana, nataka kuwa president, nataka wawe wakuje pamoja, waongee, tukue pamoja.
Tribalism itupiliwe mbali. Pia reconciliation, kama una kitu iko mbaya side, kama parties wanafaa tu kuja mahali mmoja wa form kitu inajenga Kenya.
Usichague leader ati Julia amekuja amekupea 50 100 yenyewe, na after hapo huyo mtu utamonda after 5 years. Kitu kwanza lazima tuangalie leaders wetu wako na maendeleo, watu wako na development, na kitu kwanza mtu mwenye anajua shida zetu.
We need unity, we need transparency and accountability. Mpaka utubadilishe kabila na tuseme ukweli.
Right, unity, transparency, accountability, some saying 2022, some talking about the need for cohesion, etc. Mashariel, let me start with you. What should that new frontier be? And if you would, let's add the current issue of this looming or possible swearing in of the NASA principals. Do you foresee the battle between, you know, constitutionalism on one hand, as some would like to call it, and the reform agenda on the other?
I think what we need to do to remember as we enter 2018 is that the problems of last year have not left us. The fact that we jumped the year means nothing. It's just a date on the calendar. The fact that we got a president and who was sworn in and has taken office, it means nothing. And because those issues have not been resolved, we must now focus on resolving them. We are going to be resolving them at a time when there is still, as people are saying, succession politics. In Jubilee, they are already fighting over who is going to be the president in 2022 and who is going to be his deputy and who is going to be what. Mr. Odinga and his NASA people are still fighting for what they call electoral justice. We are here talking about the need for reform, the need for change, the need for dialogue. But to dialogue about what? We cannot even agree what it is we want to dialogue about. Is it electoral injustice? Is it historical injustices? Is, you know, there's a world of divide between the two. We must find what is it that we really need to sort out. There are short-term issues, of course. Those I think would be what we're calling electoral injustice. There are other bigger issues, the things which really divide us and force us as a country to always go into war anytime we go into electioneering. Those are not things we can solve in 2 months or 3 months, but we can set the mechanisms for discussing them and solving them. But first, I think as Kenyans, we also have to sit back. It is so easy to say the problem is Raila and Uhuru and the Kenyatas and Odingas and all that, the political classes. But who elects those fellows into office? It is us. It is us. If you elect a thief and you expect him to stop stealing, you're a very foolish person. If you elect a tribal warlord and expect him to stop thinking of how he's going to kill everybody else so that his own tribe can have everything, you must be a very foolish person. So if we're going to change our political system, it actually must start with us, that we have to elect the right people. If we go on electing people like robots in 2022 just because somebody told us it's our turn to eat, our tribe's turn to eat, nothing will ever change.
Okay, what should be the new frontier, Patrick?
I think let us actually go back to basics. All the problems we're discussing now and people are saying we've got issues, in my view, had been discussed already and sorted out. We don't need to go into that conversation again. Electoral injustice, what is electoral injustice? Define it, right? We've had 3 changes of the IEBC. Why? The only thing we need to change is the process of selecting the people who are going to run that thing. It's not about the IEBC itself, right? We've changed it 3 times and it still hasn't worked, purely because the people who are put there are seem to be partisan and everybody's trying to poke holes into what they're doing. So that constitution that we have in Kenya, there is nothing wrong with it. It is the people of Kenya. We need to change, and I agree completely with Michelle. We need to actually change the process of selecting the people who go to implement that constitution. And the constitution was very clear. You got values about as Kenyans, and yet we talk about those guys have got the values. What kind of values have they got? When people are being misused by the people in leadership, are those the kind of values that Kenyans want? So we as Kenyans have to begin adopting those values. If we don't do that, we are going to end up with exactly the same thing, whether you change the constitution or not, or whether you go and talk about electoral justice, you talk about anything, corruption, whatever, and everything else.
We should be changing
all those
ourselves.
things. We should change ourselves so that effectively the constitution that we have can be given meaning, because it is good. I have no problems with it at all. Right? We talked about what we wanted, all the sort of original injustices, social injustices from a long time ago. All that went into making that constitution. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. The thing that is wrong with it is us Kenyans.
All right. We the people, are we the new frontier in our politics? Should we be?
I think that we the people are indeed the new frontier because, like has been said by my colleagues here, we've had this conversation before. In fact, we had a very elaborate conversation post 2007-2008. We came up with the Agenda 4 items that needed to be addressed, and they identified the key issues: transitional justice, land justice, electoral justice, and all that, including a new constitution, which we got. The problem that we have is that the rule of law and constitutionalism means nothing in Kenya. The law offers us predictable pathways for leadership. We know how leaders are going to behave. So when we talk about the rule of law, it means that a leader is not going to do what they feel like. But when you have a leadership that doesn't obey the rule of law and they break the law according wherever they find the law as a hindrance or an obstruction, and they do whatever they want to, it then begins that path of unpredictability, which is where we were. When we talk about electoral injustice, we cannot say that it is about changing the IEBC, because while we may have changed the commissioners, some elements within the secretariat have remained the same. But let's also look at management of political parties. Even as NASA complained about electoral injustice at the IEBC level, how do we run our political parties? How does ODM run its political parties? The political party management of our political parties in Kenya is completely opaque. That is where the fraud begins, and it is across the board. Now, if our leaders who come from these political parties and how they manage to ascend to leadership within the political party structures and thereby ascending to positions of power and decision making, in the country, they do it using fraud and scamming the system. Then that is the same behavior that we see coming onto the national platform, whereby through fraud and sleight of hand and circumventing the law whichever way they want, that is what manifests. Because while we can see that we are unhappy and we may point fingers at one side of the political divide, they are all not innocent. The same thing when we look at the way Parliament behaves. Here we have the law. Remember Sarah Serem's policy, the Gazette notice came out last year before the 11th Parliament broke. Therefore, everybody who was going in for elections, including MPs who were re-elected, knew that their new contract meant that they were coming in with lesser salaries. So they cannot argue that now it is illegal to, amend my, reduce my salary, so that you're breaking contracts. You knew that's what was going to happen. But you see, that is the kind of deceit. It is deceitful. It is deceitful across the board, where you elect parliamentary committee chairpersons, and then one side of the, the one arm of government then comes upon another arm of government to instruct them how to work, so that there's no separation of power. There's all these incestuous relationships that blur the lines, and people do essentially what seems right in their own eyes. So while everybody is breaking the law, even this swearing in, it's part of the same. You go do whatever you want on this side, and we're going to do whatever we want on this side. And we see that trickle down effect even among us, because while we may complain about our leaders, let us also take the mirror to ourselves as Kenyans. Kenyans are among the most lawless people. You just need to look at, you would not believe that we have highway codes in this country. People just do whatever they feel like. And so we have a system of anarchy. Look at what we call the public transport system, which is not a transport system at all. The absolute lawlessness, and the police stand looking on helplessly. Muggings. We have Safaricom handed over a 15 billion shilling CCTV surveillance system with 1,800 cameras, a call center that is manned by the police at Jogoo House. People are robbed and mugged in broad daylight, and the best thing that the police can tell us is don't make yourself attractive to thugs. Nobody is asking for accountability. We are paying for these systems. Wow. So there is a complete... So the conversation, we know the problems. Let us not try and invent new things. We know the problems that we are facing.
But what I find interesting about what you said, Daisy, is the reform of the people themselves, because we often argue about electoral reform, we need new laws, blah, blah, blah.
The leaders should be leading this charge, because leaders also have a responsibility to lead the people in the right direction. But our leaders themselves see the law as an obstruction, because it restricts them from exercising themselves whichever way they want. And so what they do is go ahead and exercise themselves whichever way they want.
And it fits into what...
But you say, Anne, picking up from what Daisy is saying, Kenyans, change doesn't come because you are directing it to come. Change comes because the wound for change is ripe, so that the past can come out of it. So Kenyans have been voting it ripe. Kenyans have been supporting leaders who are corrupt. Kenyans have been supporting theft of public funds. They have been supporting the chaos on the roads that Daisy is talking about. Kenyans thoroughly deserve the leaders they have. Now, they deserve it. And if things must get worse
Nairobi.
In water, look at the garbage in Nairobi. If you call for an election today in Nairobi, people will vote in tribe despite the garbage, which we are seeing. So let us tell everybody this way: let things get worse before they become better. London in the 1850s, people died of cholera. it was not as clean as people think London is now. But today, London is very clean. You go there and you say, this area, there was cholera, they can't believe it. So let us die of corruption. Let us die of ethnicity.
Prof, I'm not ready to
yes,
but we're heading
no, don't underrate what I'm saying. Let people, if they have been benefiting from corruption, they have been benefiting from stealing of public funds, deceit, electoral fraud, let it continue until everybody looks naked and we look miserable. That is what is going to psych us to change our country. But as long as people still find it attractive to think ethnically, the wound is not ripe.
And I hear you, Prof, but I suppose what I am trying to say is this, that if you remember that, the kind of conversations that we had on this program last year, we tried to call the country back from this sort of ledge that we could see ourselves, hurling towards. And I suppose what I am asking now, and very much interested in your points of view, Daisy, in terms of the change that needs to happen, the new frontier in our politics is it's about the people. It's about us changing how we think, how we, I hope that we do not have to reach that extent that you're talking about of 1800s London.
We are being led there
to see that change.
When we see parliamentarians legalizing
theft of public funds.
Theft of public funds.
Right.
Why should I be outraged?
You should.
And why can't I say, this system does not represent me. This judiciary does not represent me.
Yes.
This parliament does not represent me. The only thing I can do is look for somebody to fight.
Let me ask, put the question this way. What then should be, citizen participation in that respect? It should be revolution. That's an answer. Okay.
Whether it is violent revolution or peaceful revolution,
that's one answer.
But we cannot keep.
You don't respect the law. People don't respect the law. Tomorrow, the president will tell other public servants to respect Serem.
Yes.
How can I obey Serem when members of parliament have refused to obey?
I'm sure that the
we must disobey.
I think I'd like to take a contrary view.
Patrick.
Something completely different. I believe that if we have, and I think people have to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. If we have completely naked leadership in this country, the president becomes completely naked. Everybody up there becomes completely naked.
What does that mean?
It means there is nothing hidden. I am what you see, right? And all the baggage I have is completely open.
Then we must strip
right? So they need to be stripped completely,
naked,
so that they become vulnerable.
How do you do
vulnerability,
that?
this is actually it's a voluntary thing where a leader will actually become vulnerable to become credible to the people they lead.
Do you see that happening voluntarily?
I don't think with the leadership we have in this country, that is the only strength that can bring this country to change. With the way we are at the moment, short of what Machar is talking about in terms of going through a violent process.
I didn't say it has to be violent. I did not say it has to be violent.
There has to be a revolution.
There has to be a revolution. It does not have to be violent.
For me, it is about the mentality of leadership.
I have some suggestion. I have a suggestion on your point, my brother. For example, look at devolution. 80%, 85% of 60% of what used to be done by handled by the national government have gone to the counties. But you are giving 15 shillings for every 100 shillings. You give 15 shillings to the counties with 60% of the functions. Then you leave 85 shillings for every 100 to the national government, which has 40% of the functions. Now, what does it show? We know the salary of our president. We know the salary of the deputy president. When they go to public rallies, they announce some money is going to be spent on this road, we shall bring millions like this. Is that their personal money, or it is the money which belongs to the taxpayers? Now, that means that probably there is too much money which is floating at the national government, which can be used by the executive. So the stripping you are talking about is to make sure they do not have extra money to move around and tell us they have this money, but they only earn their salary.
And then we already have the mechanism.
Yes, and we can do that.
We have the mechanism.
Them like that.
Let's listen. This is you're saying quickly.
We have the mechanism for that stripping. We have the law that requires every state officer to declare their wealth. Have they?
No.
They do not. We know that one of the quickest avenues to mind-boggling riches in this country is through public service. In fact, in a country where we continually rank among the needy countries of the world, we boast some of the richest people on the continent.
Yeah.
So the question that we must begin to ask is, what is the source of this money? Because if we were to look, if we were to aggregate the debt that is Kenya and the wealth that is in the hands of our public servants, we would probably be able to pay off our debt. So for me, the question is, and you know, because I think it's important that if we're going to make recommendations, they must be realistic. We have a political class that thrives in opaqueness, because either you are going into public service to administer the state and create an enabling environment. But if you're going there to make money, then you become an obstacle, because then the country does not get the best possible deals available, because then development becomes incidental to people eating. Okay?
Yeah, and that's why I said the president, the people who have got these 15 million people behind them, each of them are the ones who've got to start it. They've got to be the ones.
The corruption.
They've got to start right from there and say, right, I am fed up. I don't like this thing, and I'm going to deal with it. And this is me. All the things I'm saying I'm going to deal with, I don't have them. That's what I talk about, being naked. Once you've done that, then you descend on all the people who you can descend on.
And I suppose that challenge
the
is
Jubilee
squarely
system
on
goes down there,
Kenyatta.
and the Raila goes down this whole system. They both need to do it. It's not just one.
Okay, but
because otherwise.
But if President Kenyatta does it, it certainly has more impact, because he is the one in government, and then can carry that forward, you know, with those who are in government. We're running out of time. Finally, this country, of course, as we've said already, is divided, and everyone other than a section of the political class believe that we need a national dialogue. Kenya cannot continue in the cycle of ethnic and electoral violence, the class divide, and the general lawlessness that you've heard about on this program. Mugo Kibati is the founding Director General of Vision 2030, a man whose team imagined what Kenya could be. He told Opinion Court this, quote, "A national conversation on the future of Kenya as one nation in which everyone is happily invested and feels they belong is inevitable and supersedes the parochial interests of any one community or the selfish interests of any individuals or political groupings." We couldn't agree more, but the question still remains, how can such a process, how can such a conversation be people-driven, and truly people-driven, and not party-driven, partisan interest-driven?
I think we have to go back to what we did in 1997 or thereabouts, the Ufangamano initiative. That was a people-driven initiative, and the moment it picked up momentum, then it forced the political classes to come down from their lofty towers and go with what the people are deciding. We have been trying the same things in the lead up to the contested to the repeat elections, and even before then, various groups were trying to call for a bit of sober analysis of things, to call for calm, to call for reflection, and to call on our leaders to think of the country rather than themselves. It did not quite work out, and it was, you know, we're calling it a multi-sector forum, and very many groups were coming together, and some were also doing their own things. It did not work out, and then we thought, okay, fine, we cannot stop the repeat election, but after that repeat election, we must come back together, because we know the problems will not have been solved. We must come back together and seek solutions. Now, the strange thing now is that some of us are hearing that some group or some groups, some business community, some churchmen are going behind the backs of that wider stakeholders forum and trying to drive their own exclusive forum dialogue. And you're wondering, why are some being left out? Why does it look like this dialogue is geared towards supporting the government's position as opposed to being a people-driven thing? And until we step away from that, I don't know if it is KEPSA or the evangelical churches, or who, and, or the American, being sponsored by the American ambassador. I mean, until we say, wait a minute, let us go for a people's initiative, not for a businessman's initiative or a church leader's initiative. And why are some people being left out and others are, you know, why is so much secrecy about this
But
thing?
Patrick is right here, so...
Yeah, that is why I'm raising it.
You can just ask him. Patrick.
Because, no, frankly, we are surprised.
And people like Patrick are trying to manage the crisis on behalf of the state.
Let him speak for himself.
I think the whole essence of any national conversation, somebody has got to start building a process.
Certainly.
Right? And bring everybody on board. Right? And I think that process that started during the lead up to the election, there were a lot of people who were trying to sort of start a process in the individual groups, but we were not able to bring it all together.
We were working towards that.
And then it died. And I think what needs to happen now is exactly the same thing. There's also a lot of people still having a lot of conversations, including groups that I'm involved in. We need to bring all the people who are having conversations together again. We need to sort of call for everybody to come down and say, fine, let's have a national conversation, let's put people together and go back to exactly what was envisaged at that time. Something that completely leaves the politicians out of it and basically gets the Kenyan, right? And the politicians, if they come into this process, they come in as me and you, not with a political lens, but with the lens of somebody who is a citizen of Kenya who wants his country to work.
All right, we are absolutely out of time, so there's just a minute to share between Daisy and Prof, and I'm sorry for that. But Daisy, if you would get us off first in terms of how citizens can engage in creating this new frontier for politics. We saw them show up to vote. We saw them, you know, go out and protest. What can they do now?
There's already been a dialogue, as Macharia says, because we were part of that initiative. There have been conversations being had. And one thing that I want to say is that we must have an all-inclusive process, including listening to the voices that people don't want to listen to. Because what made the whole initiative really basically fall apart was there were some views that people were not happy with. And so I think that we have to have conversations where people are ready also to listen to things that maybe they are uncomfortable with, but that needs to be. But I also want to say this, because there's one thing that these dialogues continually do, where men sit together and exclude women. Okay? This was one of the things that we raised even during that forum, and we said we have to have sectoral interests represented by women as well. We know the conversation that is having right now is male-dominated. We know that one of the issues on the table is the issue of the principle of inclusivity, which the political class have completely refused to adhere to, the two-thirds gender principle. So for me, whatever conversation must be had, it cannot be framed the way it is right now. There are issues, we know what the issues are. Women must be part of that discussion. Persons with disability must be part of that discussion. The youth must be part of those discussions. People cannot sit and decide that they know what our problems are and then throw out there.
If I'm an ordinary Kenyan, I'm not a member of any of these associations that has come together, how do I engage in this multi-sectoral forum?
The multi-sectoral forum actually had a very wide array of the different sectoral interests, where quite a large number of different sectoral players, and when I say sectoral, talking about the sectors that are in the country, so that they are pretty representative.
It was very, you know, business, religious groups, trade unions, academia.
But I'm just saying, somebody's watching the program today and says, I have something to say.
Professional associations.
And I want to, you know, be included in that dialogue. How can they be part of that?
I think there should be a way. Obviously,
there should be a way.
The mechanisms will actually be made.
Those ones can be made. And the thing is that you have to identify probably existing groups which have existing structures. But once then you come down to setting up what you might call a national dialogue, obviously you will want as much inclusion as possible, including those people who are not represented under any specific elitist umbrella.
I just want, because of time, I just want to say two things. The first one, the first business of everybody is to lay ground rules for dialogue. In fact, it's not even, you know, one person. It should not be determined by either Uhuru Kenyatta or Raila Odinga. We must have a conference a national conference, even if you start with the counties, to decide on who should sit and how we can recruit you into the national conference. Once we get that, then we start dealing with the issues. The second thing is that we should never leave politicians to set the pace for the national dialogue, because they can just manage it, try to manage it. We must abandon the idea of 2022 elections. It is actually derailing us further. And start discussing the crisis, because this country is in trouble, really trouble. If we do not engage ourselves in an organized dialogue that embraces everybody, we are going to pay a heavy price. It is already recorded that those who don't respect history will not respect them. We are leading this country into bloodshed. We are leading this country into a situation that can even be genocidal. We don't want that. National dialogue should not depend on whether the president wants it or not. Should depend on the fact that Kenyans are demanding it. So what he needs to do as president, let him put in place the necessary mechanisms that will allow for everybody to have this dialogue under a certain organized system. Short of that, we are in trouble, and as I said, we are in the intensive care unit. We might never live to see the high dependency unit. We might never become sick. We must change, and the time to change is now.
And that's our time. Thank you all for your candid views. Gosh, my seatbelt wasn't on for this discussion in the first show, but I thank you so much for just completely engaging, and you for watching, and of course for reaching out to us throughout the counties, and we'll be making every effort to get your views again back on set very soon. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Ann Kiguta. God bless you. God bless Kenya. Bye-bye.